Okay, let's go ahead and compare them. If you're new here, my name's Sandra and I love old books. I have a set of encyclopedias from the 1920s. If you look back through the videos, we went over tons of stuff and everyone was loving the videos until they got to the chosen side of TikTok and they did not like this specific one, but I'm simply reading a book, so all they did was suppress the account. They couldn't get rid of me. Now, my husband found me another set of encyclopedias, this time from the 1890s, and people have been asking me to compare the differences because these are 30 years older. However, this set is way more informative and has way more information. So there is 10 pages of this specific topic. So we're going to go ahead and compare. If you want to see the original one, it's the top 2 pinned videos, part 1 and 2. And then this is the Chambers encyclopedias rather than the Chicago teaching encyclopedias. So let's see what it has to say. Jews, corrupted from Yehudim, the name given since the Babylonish captivity to the descendants of the patriarch Abraham, who about the year 2000 BC emigrated from Mesopotamia on the east side of the Euphrates to Canaan or Palestine. They were originally called Hebrews, see Hebrew language. In consequence of the famine in Canaan, Jacob, on the invitation of his son Joseph, who had become chief minister of the king of Egypt, went down thither with all his family, which numbered 70 souls, and obtained from Pharaoh permission to settle in the land of Goshen. Here the Hebrews remained, according to Exodus 12:40, for 430 years. According to the genealogical table of the Levites in Exodus 6, 16 through 25. However, their sojourn would not have lasted longer than 210 or 215 years. Most of the commenters, therefore, take with Josephus the 430 years to indicate the period from Abraham to the Exodus. CF Galatians 3:17. During the lifetime of Joseph, and probably for some generations afterward, the Hebrews were well treated and prospered, but a new dynasty, probably the 19th, arose, and they were reduced to relentless slavery. A deliverer at length appeared in the person of Moses. The circumstances of the Exodus about 1320 BC, such as the 10 plagues and the crossing of the Red Sea, are a source of continual controversy between the rationalistic and the supernaturalistic schools of biblical criticism. But the fact of the Exodus would be disputed only by the wildest skepticism. The wandering in the wilderness of the Sinaitic Peninsula is said to have lasted 40 years, though a record of the events of 2 years only has been preserved. You don't say. Way to embellish. These, however, are obviously the most important, and they contain the elaborate account of the giving of the law, Exodus 29 et seg, which is represented as a direct revelation made to Moses by Jehovah himself, who descended upon Mount Sinai in fire amid the roar of thunders and the quaking of hills. The antiquity, however, of the priestly or ecclesiastical portions of the Pentateuch is keenly disputed by a rapidly growing majority of modern scholars, even so orthodox an authority as Dr. Felich, having become a convert to their views shortly before his death. The modern schools seek to show the probability of such passages having been composed and inserted subsequent to the great organization of the priesthood by David, and in proof of the point, among other evidences, to the book of Judges, which narrates the history of the Hebrews some 200 years after the conquest of Canaan, and which yet contains scarcely a single trace of the existence of Mosaic institutions among them. For the origin of the law as we now have it, the development of the national consciousness, and the growth of the Old Testament literature, see Bible, there is a growing tendency among critics to localize and the giving of the law and the various events connected with Revelation at Kadesh rather than in the so-called Sinaitic Peninsula. The land of promise became theirs at last, about 1274 BC, under Joshua, the successor of Moses. Tribe after tribe was swept from its ancient territory and for the most part either annihilated or forced to flee. Yet the whole bulk of the native inhabitants was not extirpated or expelled, nor even subdued till a much later period. The country was now divided among the Hebrew tribes. The magnificent pastoral region to the east of the Jordan was now occupied by the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, while the land west of the Jordan was parceled out to the remaining Judah, Simeon, Dan, Benjamin, Ephraim, and second half-tribe of Manasseh. Ishkar, Zebulon, Naphtali, and Asher. The tribe of Levi received instead of a province 48 cities scattered throughout Canaan and the 10th part of the fruits of the field, and were allowed generally to settle individually throughout the land where they chose. After the death of Joshua, about 1254 BC, the want of a chief to the young state became sadly palpable. Little regard was paid to the Mosaic institutions. The single tribes pursued their own individual interest. Intermarriages with the idolatrous natives weakened the bond of union still further, and the next consequence was that the tribes were singly subdued by the surrounding nations. At this juncture, there arose at intervals valiant men and women, judges, Shophitim, who liberated the people from their oppressors, the Moabites, Philistines, Ammonites, Amalekites, etc. 15 of these are named, some of whom appear to have been contemporary with each other and to have exercised authority in different parts of the country. This period constitutes the heroic age of Hebrew history. Among these judges, the prophetess Deborah, Gideon, Jephthah, and Hercules, Samson, and the prophet Samuel are especially notable. The last mentioned was, in every sense of the word, the greatest Hebrew that had yet appeared since the days of Moses. The first of the prophets, he was also the last of the Republican chiefs of the Confederate tribes. Wearied of their intestine feuds, harassed by the incursions of their predatory neighbors, chiefly, however, goaded by the characteristic desire to be like all the other nations. 1 Samuel 8:5. The people compelled him in his old age to choose for them a king. 1067 BC. The first who exercised regal authority was Saul, the Benjamite. 1067 through 1055 BC. But though a distinguished warrior and the man of royal presence, he appears not to have possessed the mind of a statesman, and his willfulness and paroxysms of insanity finally alienated him from many of the bravest and the best of his subjects. After his death on Mount Gilboa, David, his son-in-law, was proclaimed king, 1055 to 1015 BC. This monarch was by far the greatest that ever sat on the throne of Israel. His reign and that of his equally famous son Solomon are regarded as the golden time in Hebrew history. The remaining aborigines of Canaan and its borders, viz., the Philistines, Edomites, Amalekites, Moabites, etc., were thoroughly subdued. The boundaries of the Hebrew kingdom were extended as far as the Euphrates and the Red Sea. Jerusalem was captured and made the capital of the conqueror. The priesthood was reorganized on a splendid scale. The art of poetry, music, and architecture were cultivated. Schools of prophecy, first established probably by Samuel, began to flourish. A magnificent temple for the worship of Jehovah was built in the capital, and commercial intercourse was carried on with Phoenicia, Arabia, Egypt, with India and Ceylon, and perhaps even with Sumatra, Java, and the Spice Islands. But there was a canker at the root of all this prosperity. Okay, I know that it seems kind of long and redundant, but I promise it gets to some good stuff. Come back for part 2.